Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-conspirator for liberty. Daniel, good to have you here.
That's a nice title, Dr. Paul. Thank you. How are you this morning?
I'm doing fine, and I'm trying to improve things. And it annoys me because I don't think it's complicated. From our viewpoint, it's not complicated. What we have is complicated, and there's all sorts of things going on. I want to mention a couple things before we get into the big issue today of it looks like a planned attack in Venezuela. At least the Navy's looking like they're prepared for it.
Yeah.
But I want to mention first, one statistic that came out today was the 6.6 million people applying for unemployment benefits, but in the last 2 weeks there were 10 million. And this is hardly a natural consequence from free market economics. This is a consequence of us, self-destructing. Anyway, it's related to the virus and all, but it's a serious thing. They don't give us reports like this and blame the virus. They don't blame the Fed like they blame the virus. But anyway, it's significant. It plays havoc with the market. The market went sharply down. Now it's up significantly, and there's just chaos in the markets trying to figure this all out. But there was another item in the news that I wanted to mention because we've talked about this in the past, and it was something that over the years I've spent a lot of time on, and that is the draft, the military draft, registration for the draft. And unfortunately, since the early 70s, we haven't had a draft, but we also always have a registration for the draft. But we've also all predicted that, when the time comes when they need us, the draft will involve the women because they want an equal opportunity to self-destruct, go out and get shot at. But no, the system is, yes, we want to be the equal, so we want to be drafted as well. And so there is a proposal by the commission that studies this, and they're moving it along to suggesting that women have to be registered because it's not equal. And they may have a technical point there, but the real civil libertarian point is, why do we ever have a draft, or why do we plan for it? And why do we still have registration if they don't think they want the ability to use us? But I think if we went to the House floor and they were going to vote on this, they'd say, we can't get rid of the registration, and they'd sign. I think the majority would sign up and say, yeah, we have to register the women too, because that's the only way to be fair. So, Daniel, good to have you getting started here today. And in a minute, we'll get into the program. I think you have a point to make.
Yeah, I had one thing that I'd noticed that may not have been across everyone's radar, and a friend of mine posted this on Facebook. But this is a disturbing trend where so-called private companies are getting all on board with this crackdown on our liberties. Here's something to have a look at. This next clip here. This is a company you don't know anything about who they are, who funds them, what it's all about. But essentially, what they're doing is using our cell phones to track how much we move around. Remember, Judge Napolitano warned about this years ago. They're basically using this to figure out how much we move around, and they'll give us a scorecard by county in the U.S. to show if you're social distancing enough, or if you get a bad grade, if you're a bad guy. Wyoming got an F. They're moving around too much. It's a big state with nobody in it,
Right.
But it's really frightening because they're tracking every one of our phones. All the things are coming online like this because of the coronavirus. They're not going to go away. It's getting a lot worse.
Right. Now, today, the big news occurring yesterday, a major press conference from our military leaders, which included our president, and it was a rather strong announcement, and nobody would ever accuse them of doing it on purpose to distract from coronavirus or take advantage of the coronavirus, and they're going to go over. But they're talking about, and they're in the midst of having the biggest naval buildup since 1989, and that's when Bush went in and with a large naval force and got rid of Noriega. And they said this is some reported as the largest. That's hard to believe with all our vessels around the world in the Middle East. Maybe they're talking about Central America. Anyway, it's big, and there's a lot of vessels going in, and the excuse is, we're protecting the American people from the drug dealers.
Yeah.
I wonder if that'll include the CIA as well. Do you think? I mean, I think there was evidence that the CIA's been involved in drug dealing, but we know the CIA is much above that. They will handle it in a different manner. But this is a big issue. It looks like they are preparing for something, because I think it's true that Maduro was indicted.
Yes.
He's in a U.S. court, just like they did with Noriega. And I always thought this was pretty. I mean, Noriega was no angel. He was an ally of the CIA, and here he was indicted up here and put in an American prison. If you don't think that's arrogance, I would think South Americans and Central Americans should be a little bit annoyed with that. But the process looks very similar to what they did with Noriega. But that doesn't mean that, in 30 days there's going to be an invasion, because we do know the president shifts his efforts. He might think he's going to get away with scaring people into it, with the excuse that people aren't allowed to get away with taking advantage of us because we're fighting the coronavirus. But it's something that we have to be frightened about, because when they have a naval buildup, they have no idea whether they're really not planning to send in the troops and capture Maduro and this sort of thing like they did with Noriega. But things can go wrong. A vessel can be sunk, and sometimes it's a red flag, and sometimes it's on purpose, all kinds of things. But for us to think that we have to spend billions of dollars to have this huge naval buildup to plan an attack against Venezuela's leaders, it really doesn't make much sense how that is going to help the American people. Yes, we have a drug problem, but I think the drug problem, people who use too much drugs.
Yeah.
And of course, there's been, and I've been on the side of this argument, that you don't have to worry about drug cartels if you had a lot less laws that protected their monopoly.
Yeah.
You develop monopoly because they are contained by force and they control things. And so this has nothing to do with the drug problem that we face, because this will only make it worse. Because if it worked to a slight degree, you diminish the flow of drugs, the price goes up. So that's a mess. But anyway, this is thrown into the mess here, and this will contribute to the chaos that we have in our financial markets and our political system that we're facing today.
Yeah, and you talk about the Noriega situation, what happened, what a coincidence it is. Well, here's another big coincidence, Dr. Paul. You see that guy standing next to the president yesterday, our old friend William Barr? Well, a younger William Barr wrote the legal justification for the U.S. invasion of Panama way back in 1989. The same guy. They never go away. The idea that you can arrest a foreign leader, let alone citizen, for violating American laws at the time was untested. The Carter administration had determined that you can't do that. And this was one of the big achievements of Herbert Walker Bush, to say, oh, yes, we can. We can do whatever we want. But not only that, last week, Barr indicted Maduro, the president of Venezuela, as a drug trafficker. But not only that, they put a $15 million bounty on his head, a bounty on the head of a foreign leader. That's something that a gangster does. It's not something that a country does. It's absolutely insane. But here we had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs yesterday. Here's what he said. They are trying to tie it in with the coronavirus. Here's what Milley said, General Milley. We came upon some intel, of course they'll never tell us, that the drug cartels, as a result of COVID-19, are going to try to take advantage of this situation and try to infiltrate additional drugs into our country. We're at war with COVID-19. We're at war with terrorists, and we're at war with the drug cartels as well. At war with everyone, including the American people. But that's their justification. They're tying the two together to start waving the war flags toward Venezuela.
Right. One thing I noticed at the press conference, our military leaders, those who are pushing for war, didn't follow the social distancing. They were huddled together. So they must know something that the rest of the country doesn't know. They must not be fearful of closeness with their buddies, up there. But Milley, the Joint Chiefs of Staff general, he made a statement because he expressed an answer to what my concern was. This costs money, don't you know?
Yeah.
He says, it's unlimited. You cannot limit the defense of this country because of money. So in other words, open up the door, spend whatever you need. This is expensive. And of course, that's what they're doing with the war on terrorism, which was a war against the American people, and the war against, the American people when it comes to the virus, a war against the virus. It's really a war against liberty of the people here at home.
And the president's national security advisor, O'Brien, remember, he's the guy, along with Pompeo, was telling the president, hey, Iran's on his back heels. Let's hit him now. It's a good time. This was his big thing. Well, we have a clip. Here's him. We have a JPEG of him at the press conference. It's a little small, but I'm putting it up here because he is the one who explicitly is tying it to Venezuela. He's talking about, using this military operation. He said it will reduce illicit financial support for drug trafficking that provides the corrupt regime in Venezuela, the Maduro regime, and other bad actors with the funds necessary to conduct their malign activities. Under President Trump's leadership, we'll continue to exercise our maximum pressure policy to counter the Maduro regime. Then he goes on to say, Maduro, narco-terrorists and criminals should make no mistake, et cetera, puffing up what he's doing. But what's interesting about this whole tying Maduro in with it? This is something that we republished from Dave DeCamp, who had it on antiwar.com. Using the government's own statistics, Venezuela, of course, is only a transit country. It's not a producer of drugs. It's extremely minor. And actually, if we can put up that next clip, it's interesting to show. And this is from Dave DeCamp's piece. And I won't read it all. But basically, a closer look at where the cocaine into the U.S. comes from shows that using the government's own statistics, only 7% of the cocaine that came to the U.S. moved through Venezuela's eastern Caribbean waters. The vast majority moved through the eastern Pacific. And by the way, went through our friends, the Colombians and other countries that are allied. They're doing tons more trafficking. But because we like those governments, we're completely ignoring the fact that they're key in this so-called drug trafficking.
That's right, and this is used endlessly because this war on drugs has been going on for so long. They learn nothing about the foolishness of prohibition of alcohol, how things were made much worse during prohibition. As bad as alcohol is, it was still not the answer to it. But there is this effort to deal with problems that has come from the financial bubble, which is created by spending in the Federal Reserve, which we all know about. It's something that we have done to ourselves. It's not the enemy. The enemy is within. The enemy is not foreign. It's domestic. And then we do deal with the bubble in the wrong way. We deal with the drug trafficking the wrong way. And I think that more and more people now are beginning to believe that maybe this overkill on regulating people's habits and rather than letting people make their own decisions with whom they should associate.
Yeah.
Sure, there could be some risk, but why can't they decide which group they're going to go to? And this closing down of all the jobs, and they think they can just print money for all the harm that they do, because I imagine that there are millions and millions of people now that are controlled by these rules that we put on ourselves. So productivity has to go down. People are going to suffer, and they believe very sincerely that if you just print a lot of money, it's going to solve this problem. And it might for a week. They're going to get a check, and what if they give $10,000 to a family for a couple of months even? It's not going to work, but it's going to end. And that's the only thing that we do. But we do to ourselves. It's sort of weird. We put all the sanctions on the countries we can't stand. Just look at the punishment that we put on the Iranian people. And even now we're pretending to say, hey, maybe it's overboard and we should help them out because they're doing so badly. But I'll believe that when I see it. So the sanctions we do to our enemies, but there's nothing as inclusive as the sanctions that we're putting on ourselves. And even you could throw into this the damage done by having somebody that believes and teaches everybody, and it's in our whole system, that deficits don't matter. Printing money doesn't matter. Regulations are always good because they're, well-intended politicians. And that's how you create a free and prosperous, happy society. I think we're on the wrong track. to sort of summarize that, we're on the wrong track, but I'm also convinced the right track is available to us, and it's not that difficult to explain and understand. It's much more difficult to overcome the political power that the politicians have in selling out these goods and services. What do you have free goods? I mean, the epitome of this is people running for the presidency thinking, what kind of free stuff do you want?
Yeah.
And it's corporations and individuals, everybody wants the free stuff. So when we get into the mess that was predictable, all we say is, we'll give you more free stuff. Well, we better buckle down because that's coming to an end, and they ought to look eventually, we will have to if we want to survive, that the answers can be found in a free society, not in a totally authoritarian society and more socialism.
Yeah, that's for sure. But, in the meantime, there are a lot of distractions out there, and I think, what we're talking about here is one of them. The neocons, led by Pence, idiotically last year declared Juan Guaido the president, the guy who never ran for office. Oh, here's your president. But their coup, which they promised Trump, this is going to be a cakewalk, don't worry, we'll overthrow this guy within a week, it's no big deal. Totally flopped, utterly flopped. And now they're left a year later with egg on their face, and they've got this open wound that they've created. 40,000 people have died because of our sanctions, according to a recent study. But with this COVID-19, now they see their opportunity, these neocons. But here's what's ironic, Dr. Paul. They're guilty of exactly what they accuse the drug cartels of doing, taking advantage of the coronavirus to push their agenda. And it's exactly what they are doing. But here's a kind of a twist. Is the U.S. about to invade Venezuela? It's possible. Hopefully Trump is astute enough to realize he's being set up and reject it. But here's a twist, Dr. Paul. Kind of flew under the radar, but on March 28th, the Russian news agency TASS reported that all assets of the Russian company Rosneft in Venezuela have been acquired by the Russian government. So the Russian government directly now controls and owns all of the assets previously owned by this semi-private company Rosneft in Venezuela. So is the U.S. going to invade Venezuela and start blowing up a bunch of Russian oil assets? That's a big question.
A little more complicated than they had hoped for, but they unfortunately learned too late when the problems accelerate. I want to talk just a short time, I mentioned about how Mexico fits into this.
Yeah.
Because we know that Mexico is responsible for all our shortcomings, and the borders are controlled by drug dealers, which is probably true, which is a result of our drug laws. So yesterday at that press conference, they talked about cartels and mentioned Mexico, but I haven't heard any mention from the Mexican government, who's not exactly super supporters of the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And they are saying that they may come out with a position that they're not so happy. You made the point, that even the drugs coming in, only a small amount comes through Venezuela. But we do know that a lot of drugs come through Mexico, and we do know there are drug cartels there. But to say that the producer and the people who sell this are the problems, not the people who want the stuff, at artificial prices. So I think that's a unknown right now on how they will respond, because they may well decide to put a monkey wrench in this. But I can't believe our military people wouldn't have to take that into consideration if they're out attacking cartels. But of course, again, the attack on the cartels is all a distraction. I don't think that's what their real goal is. That's their excuse. So is to go and protect the American people against drugs. That was their ultimate excuse to justify this planned war.
Well, hopefully they'll realize that I'm going to close here, but that Venezuela is not Panama. It's a much bigger country with a larger military, and it's not going to be a cakewalk that the neocons are talking about. But let's not forget also that in Panama, thousands of people were killed, villages bombed at random, civilians died. That wasn't reported in the U.S. because we needed a real feel-good story, and that's what it was. But I would just close by saying, we are getting a lot of interesting comments from commenters that I don't recognize on our site, and that's good and bad. A lot of people are coming in, well, Ron, I've always supported you, but I'm going to break with you now. It's kind of suspicious. So It's kind of interesting to see that happening. But I would just finally close with a little update on our conference, because we haven't talked about it a lot. And frankly, the reason is we don't know. It's up in the air. We had scheduled for May 23rd a big conference in Houston on the attacks on freedom of speech, which kind of ironically is now even more important. We don't know if they'll let us hold the conference. We're still crossing our fingers. We have quite a few people signed up, sold about half the seats we have available. Obviously, the sales have slowed now because people just aren't sure what's going to happen. Obviously, if we can't have it, we'll refund ticket prices. We'll give you the refunds back. We hope we can, because we think it's an important topic. So we're crossing our fingers. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to ronpaulinstitute.org, and there's a little on the right side, on the top, a little headline about it. But we just wanted to keep you posted. We're still hoping to have it. It's still going to be a great event. We may have to delay it, but let's hope not. We'll keep you posted.
Very good. And I want to thank our viewers, as usual, for tuning in and for the support that you provide for us. But, you know, we have to report on these issues which aren't really on the top priority for the mainstream media, because they are significant, and of course the things are put under control because they want you to hear the issues that they're dealing with, the virus and why we have to close it down, why we have to sanction ourselves, why we have to spend the money, why we have to go into bankruptcy, and why it's ridiculous and so dangerous to let people go to work, and how bad it is for people to make their own decisions about what risks are all about. You know, you can have an understanding of risk, and all of a sudden you can change your attitude about all this. You don't deny all the dangers. You just let people decide their own, in their own mind, what is more dangerous to do, and make the decision. But it is a problem that we're facing, and this is why we're talking about something that could be very, very dangerous, and yet it may be, once again, another bluff. You know, troops move in and then they move back. But this sounds more serious than that. It doesn't sound like a bluff, and I hope that I'm wrong on that, and they don't go in and foolishly decide, well, we're going in there and take Maduro out and bring him to the United States and try him and throw him in a prison and virtually destroy a man's life like they did with Noriega. But the whole thing about the Noriega, you can't sympathize with him. He was in business with the CIA, you know, all the time doing the drug deals. And of course, Saddam Hussein was in business with us too. So that is why you have to be careful, because it's not easy to criticize one's own government. But I took the advice one time that, and I believe this, it's a little risky, and that is that, you know, to be patriotic, you ought to be willing to, in your best efforts, to criticize one's own government. And that is a lot of risk, and there's people that do that. And sometimes when you have people stand up in the Congress and even challenge some of the stupidities on spending and say, oh, you know what, we ought to have a vote on this. And that's something that Thomas Massie has done. And it makes a point that peer pressure is so bad that many people go along with it. But eventually, the moral and financial bankruptcy of this country will demand a change. The only thing is I hope I'm right in believing that there's enough Americans left who would like to see the change move in the direction and the acceptance of liberty and personal responsibility. Those are worthy goals because they're so practically beneficial and they are so morally correct as far as I'm concerned. But I do want to thank you once again for joining us today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.